my knowledge of Doug Reed and those routes were kind of apocryphal. He's that type of figure. He's a legend. He's this name in the guidebook underneath all the routes you go and you look up because you saw one bolt on some impossible face and you wondered how that could possibly be there. And turns out it was Doug Reed.
You asked for butter bread. That's what she said. Well, you give it love and get it blood and we're right to your hand. Don't walk away. Don't walk away. Now don't you see? If it's all right with you, then mama, it's all right with
I wouldn't be surprised if there were a lot of people out there who use Doug Reed routes as sort of their benchmark of like, yeah, I've made it. I've reached that sort of climbing peak that I was hoping for.
The name for the route, Majasha, came from the lyrics of a song that we used to listen to, Porter and I, by a guy named John Wayne. It's kind of a funny rock band, and they had a song, Texas Jail Cell, and they talked about Majasha in the song, and we never really knew exactly what it was that they were talking about, but we liked the name of liked the way that it sounded, and so that's what we used for the name on that route. Here you'll see when I'm climbing Majasha, I did have a very serious shoulder injury. I had torn a fairly large mass of muscle off the scapula on my back, the rhomboid in particular. I had a couple of weeks prior to that been doing a training day at Lizard Wall, and I had knocked out about a dozen 512 pitches in a matter of about a half a day, and then for a little more training was bouldering at the base of the wall and got kind of iron crossed out in a traversing situation, and just was so exhausted the weak link just went, and that happened to be that particular muscle, and just ripped it right off the bone. And I tried to climb for the next couple of weeks off and on, and this particular ascent was the final straw. The pain just got too great, and this was the last time I climbed for quite a long while, and this particular injury ended up taking about 5.5 months for that large piece of muscle to reattach itself thoroughly to the bone. I climb almost exclusively on sandstone. One reason for that is obviously that in the south, the sandstone is the best medium. It's the steepest, most solid rock there is. Most climbers that I see out at the crag that are fairly committed to the sport, that are putting in a good amount of time and work into their climbing, are looking for challenging sport climbs generally, and generally they want to climb steeper and steeper stone. Regardless of their fitness level, they want to be climbing oftentimes on the steepest route that they can physically handle. People love to go to the glory hole, and if they're only at a 12A fitness level, they love that easiest link up in there. Maybe it's not the best route in the hole there, but it gets them on the steepest stone possible, and there seems to be a real desire among climbers to at least sample that sort of climbing, and most people get hooked on it. They love the dynamics of the moving over really steep stone. It's really exhilarating to get into such outrageous situations that maybe from the ground look unclimbable just because of the angle.
I mean, he kind of dragged sport climbing, and he kind of single-handedly raised the standards in the East Coast, I think. Yeah. And people kind of slowly caught up to him. But yeah, I mean, at the time he was doing it, there was just nobody really.
Yeah.
Maybe there was people as good a climber as he was, and maybe there was people who were good at pointing out first ascents, but he kind of had that total package of he was able to travel around and really, take climbing and elevate it to a higher level.
Yeah. So, Doug, tell us how in the world you got started in this rock climbing business.
Well, it is kind of odd, especially since I come from Mississippi, which not much rock climbing going on there. But when I was, I believe, about 12 or 13, I went to a summer camp in Sewanee, Tennessee, did some rock climbing, and I was pretty hooked on it then. Went back home and we'd be doing sort of climbing around, technical climbing around in trees and stuff like that,
Really?
My younger brother, Locke, contrary to what some people think, my brother Maurice is actually older than me. Locke is my younger brother. And he went to a summer camp up here in North Carolina, and they did some climbing in the Table Rock, Linville Gorge area. And so got some gear, and somehow my parents let us just take off with the car, me being 17 and him 14 at the time. Took off on the first climbing trip. Didn't even actually own a rope.
Really?
Went up into Foot Sloggers in Boone, and they quite irresponsibly sold us a rope and a guidebook. That was Buddy Price's book. As a matter of fact, one of the routes we stumbled across and climbed is documented in guidebooks in that Devil's Cellar area called a Quiver. And if I remember correctly, I think in the guidebooks it always is incorrect and says that I climbed that with my older brother Maurice, who I did tons of climbing with. But in fact, it was my younger brother Locke who climbed that thing.
You mean a first ascent?
Yep, sure was. Yeah.
When you were first learning to climb?
Yeah, just kind of stumbled across it.
Oh, wow.
That was actually on a day that was so foggy up there, you could just hardly see your hand in front of your face, and we just kind of just wandered up in there. And then, like I said, I went to boarding school out in Arizona and climbed a lot. And Maurice went to boarding school up in Vermont, and he started climbing a lot up there. But the two of us didn't really climb together until we got out of high school. And pretty quick after getting out of high school, he and I moved to Colorado and kind of pretended to go to college out there and did a lot of rock climbing. Yeah, all over the Front Range. I probably did, within just a couple of years, did over 100 routes.
Wow.
Not first ascents,
Yeah.
100 routes in the Front Range, Flatirons, up in Boulder Canyon, El Dorado Canyon, all that kind of stuff. I lived in Colorado for, I think, about 3 years, and then I had a girlfriend that was going to go to school at UNC Charlotte, and that's when I moved to North Carolina and started climbing in North Carolina. Frankly, I was climbing at a little bit higher grade than most of the guys around climbing in the Piedmont, and that being the case, there was just a treasure trove of first ascents to be done. And right about that time, one of the first ascents I did would have been the first 512 in North Carolina. Nobody was yet climbing up at that 512 grade, and that would have been out at Crowder's Mountain. And Wes Love and I were climbing a whole lot together, doing a lot of first ascents. And that's also about the time that I met Tommy Howard. And he kind of like me had a real, I mean, he liked going out and exploring and doing first ascents. And that's how he and I kind of teamed up, because he already done a lot of the background work. He knew where the rock was, so I didn't have to start from scratch. I mean, he held back on some of that stuff, but he shared a lot, and it really cut my kind of exploring and learning time down by going off what he had already done and what he knew about.
Do you remember where you and Tommy first went?
Probably Shiprock. I'm pretty sure.
very early on, certainly. And that was before the parkway was completed through there. That Lynn Cove section of the parkway was not there. And so you parked down on 221 and hoofed it up the hill to that cliff. So it was a bit more remote kind of spot then. And Tommy and Lee Carter, Jim Okel, some of those guys had started doing some route development there, but once again it was pretty wide open. If somebody were climbing at a 5'11", 5'12" kind of range, there was a ton of stuff to be done. I would do a lot of free soloing and did over a long period of time, both when I was in North Carolina and even later on after I moved up to West Virginia, and also when I lived in Colorado. I was climbing free soloing at a somewhat lower grade, but doing a lot of fairly hard stuff, a lot of 5'9", 5'10" stuff, and bigger stuff, 800 foot,
wow,
stuff like that, and doing a lot of barefoot climbing. Barefoot climbing was kind of a popular thing back then, and like I mentioned, I did the one solo lap on that Gunfighter, but yeah, did a good bit of that barefoot climbing.
I really think Doug did a great job in his selection of new routes. I think he authored the highest volume of high quality climbs of the new. He had a great eye for a line. He was very particular about things he would bulls. He wanted to make sure that the lines were worthy of the effort. And as a result, I think he made a fantastic collection of routes there.
When did you discover New River Gorge? Was that with Tommy?
Well, I'm not going to take credit for that. Now,
well, I don't mean discover it for yourself.
For myself.
Yeah.
So here's kind of how just an overview of how that stuff went down. So there's a guy that lived in Beckley, West Virginia, Bruce Bergen, and he put on a bulletin board at Seneca a few pictures and a note that said, "This is the New River Gorge, and if anybody's interested in climbing over here, there's a bunch of rock. Give me a call and I'll show you what I know about." And Tommy and I'm pretty sure Jim Okel were at Seneca and saw that and called up Bruce. And went up there and went and rappelled in. I think the first place they went into, they just walked out to Endless Wall and rappelled in, and they happened to be just at a beautiful section of cliff. And if I'm not mistaken, I think the first thing they climbed was that just beautiful lieback feature called route called the Undeserved. Just mega classic. And so they did some routes, and then he came back and told me about it. And this was kind of backing up on the timeline from where I was talking about the power drill coming in and everything. We didn't have power drills yet. So we're still pretty much fairly strictly trad.
So this would have still been early 80s, early to mid?
Early.
And how much development had there been at the new before?
Not much.
Really?
And yeah, people were still mainly going to Seneca.
Wow.
And went up there, and West Love would go up there with us some, made some trips up there, and we'd climb at Beauty Mountain and Endless Wall and stuff. Put up some real super classic trad stuff, but we were following crack features and putting in pro, and did a whole bunch of good stuff, but there was kind of a limit to the difficulty level you could do there. And back home here, I was, kind of trying to push the envelope, difficulty wise. And we really kind of got to a place after a few trips up there, we just kind of said, that place is really great, but there's just too much blank rock in between the cracks. Really? And so we kind of just didn't go back up there for a few years. And, it's just like, and then we came back, back here in North Carolina and started experimenting with more and more fixed gear. And that's when we kind of like, maybe we could go back up there and do something with some of that blank rock. When my brother Maurice and I started climbing, putting up a ton of routes down in Alabama in the winter, Little River Canyon, places like Lizard Wall. We were, for a season or two, we were real hush-hush about that. We grabbed up dozens and dozens of routes down there when very few people were really active yet down there. Put up almost every one of those routes at Lizard Wall. That's an impressive, real dense zone of climbing, and that's really when I kind of started developing a philosophy about route development, where I was really looking. He'd kind of taken it beyond just developing a route. I was wanting to develop climbing areas, you know, just a kind of a more complete look at it. I sometimes would equip and climb as many as 3 sport routes in a day, and that I'd be worn out.
Yeah.
But yeah, climb pretty much full time for just shy of 10 years. I don't know that I'd ever want to actually, certainly wouldn't state this as fact, but it's been speculated that I did in excess of 600 first ascents.
Okay.
And I think that'd put it in the ballpark.
Yeah.
But, you know, I personally didn't ever really document climbing very much. I don't hardly have any pictures of myself climbing or any of that stuff.
Too busy moving.
Yeah.
Any projects or routes or lines or areas that you wish that you had done before you take it off?
Yeah, definitely. Right at the end of my climbing career, I was trying to do a route. Man, it's just painful to even look at the cover of that guidebook. But there's a route at the Cirque, pretty far upriver at New River Gorge, and there was a 13D route there that I just worked over and over. I bet I climbed that thing with one hang dozens of times. Just never could send it, and the clock was ticking. I was about to go spend a year in Australia. Time was running out, and I just couldn't quite get it. And I think that guy, Timmy Fairfield, I believe is who's in that picture on the cover of the guidebook, and he sent that thing at 13D. And I just never could tick it. And that basically was the end of my climbing career, you know. Moved to Australia for a year and just kind of like call it done.
Really? Yeah. With all that great rock in Australia, airs and everything.
Yeah, I did go down and climb in Australia previous to that. I took a trip down there and climbed at Mount Arapiles. And yeah, so I did take a trip down there previous to
What
that.
brought you to Australia the second time?
My ex-wife, girlfriend at the time, she got a scholarship to go to university down there for a year through the Rotary clubs, and I took a full year off. Didn't work, just played mountain bike. Started getting into endurance trail sports, running, mountain biking and stuff, and just.
And what year would this have been?
Early 90s or something like
Really?
that. Yeah.
So your entire intense climbing career spanned over how many years?
The intense part of it, about 10 years.
Yeah.
Well, I shouldn't say that. A little less than 10 years where I would say I was climbing full time.
Yeah.
You know, but there was probably another 10 years where I climbed a lot. You know.
13D up at New River Gorge that you were working on but unable to do. We don't know the name to this day?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think.
And soon after that, you went to Australia.
Yep, and basically quit climbing.
And what year did we decide that was?
I'm estimating, but sometime in the mid 90s or so, mid 90s,
Okay.
and really never got back into being an avid climber until My kids' Christmas break this 2018.
Really?
My two kids got into gym climbing, Hallie and Ben, solely on their own. I was always super hesitant to try to push them into climbing.
Yeah, that's incredible. I love to hear that.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, last thoughts. Where would you like to see the future of climbing head? What direction?
You know, I would just like to think that climbing will continue to be a real diverse activity. You know, people have, not so much these days, but people have tried to dictate style and whatnot to other climbers over the years. There used to be, as I had mentioned before, used to be a lot of kind of animosity between Piedmont climbers and Western North Carolina climbers, trad climbers and sport climbers, you know, and having really been involved in a lot of different styles of climbing, I feel like I have an appreciation for that, and I'd like to see all different styles of climbing continue to flourish and people to expand on that. You know, there's room out at the cliff for a lot of different ways to explore that. It doesn't have to be homogenous. You know, it's everything from gym climbing, sport climbing, trad climbing, free solo, just the whole thing, just the whole thing.
His ethos has probably shaped a lot of what the Southeast is known for. And there has probably been a strong, fundamental, powerful push from what he's done that has shaped the way this entire area looks at rock climbing and how strict the ethics are, and how there's this expectation that if you want to go climb the big, boldest things, you need to do it in the style that it was done originally. And that style was put up to such an impeccable degree, and I can't imagine that he hasn't had a just fundamental, seminal role in shaping that.
The question is though, reason what does Doug Reed shave his chest?
So no unsightly stubble, you pluck them about once a month. Want to feel?
If you had more, you'd have to probably get wax.
I know.